Oh.
Except now with her being in Switzerland, it's a WhatsApp thing, and I have to go in there to check to make sure, whatever.
Yep.
David.
Okay. Oops.
Hi, Wendy.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Nice to see you.
Julie, are you back? I guess, because I wasn't paying attention, but okay. I'll pay attention now.
How you doing, Wendy?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Amy, looked like you had a little beach vacation.
Yes, went down to Bethany Beach.
Nice.
So yes, very nice. Weather could have been better, but mornings were very nice. I was on the beach, and it's just so nice just to go away.
Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi.
Well, hello.
Good morning, all. How's everyone doing?
Hanging in.
Smiling.
Good.
Yes, smiling. Monday mornings, it's all good.
It's
The Mets won
a
yesterday.
beautiful day.
It's too cold. If you've been outside, the wind is blowing and it's too cold. Maybe
that's
later it'll be better.
It's supposed to be.
It's beautiful from my window.
Yeah, from the window, it really is
Chilly.
beautiful. That's right. Yeah.
And the grass is very green, but
Yes.
it's gonna be a challenge to get out right after class.
But on Wednesday, you're going to complain when it's 85 degrees, Wendy?
Mhm.
Yes,
I will.
fast forward. I'll complain on Wednesday as well.
Well, that's the old, when I was in my teenage years, I lifeguarded at the JCC in Montreal, and it's like the temperature of the water was either too hot or too cold. It was never just right, Yeah.
I'll be first online.
There you go. Yeah.
My neighbor planted flowers, and as people walk by, they stop and take pictures.
Oh,
nice.
you did a good job.
Yeah.
Well, welcome one and all. Welcome. So I'm really excited. I mean, I've been enjoying the Thursday mornings all year, but I'm really excited to have this 3-week cameo appearance with you on Monday mornings. And some of you are in my Thursday class, some of you are not. So I just want to very briefly go over my my protocols for a Zoom class, which are that I'm going to mute everybody in just a moment, and I'm going to mute all. And I don't want you to don't be offended when you're all muted. In fact, what I love is participation. I want you all to, throughout the class at various times, participate, offer comments, volunteer to read. And the best way to do that is either by raising your virtual hand. So if you click on participants, then you'll see there are some options, I believe, for how to raise your virtual hand, and I'll see the sign come up on your box. Or you can sort of flag me down like this, and I'll eventually get you. The other thing you can do is just unmute yourself, and I will see that you're unmuted, and I'll assume that means that you have a comment, and then I'll call on you to offer that comment. So without further ado, I am muting all. So let me set up our 3-week module this way. And I'm gonna say something that really pains me. I mean, you all know I love Israel. I love the state of Israel. I love the people of Israel. But as many of you I'm sure are aware, it is currently illegal, according to Israeli law, for a gathering of women to pray publicly, which is to create a minyan, a quorum, at the Western Wall Plaza at the Kotel, and to read from the Torah. That, what I just described, is illegal according to Israeli law. And that's why, each month on Rosh Chodesh, the group Women of the Wall, they protest this law by smuggling in a Sefer Torah, basically. And they smuggle it into the Kotel Plaza, and they protest by praying and by reading from that scroll. Some of you have seen, the YouTube photos or videos from those monthly occasions. They're not only met often with slurs and kind of like repugnant reactions from those around. Often the Haredi yeshivas, the heads of the yeshivas, kind of get buses and have their yeshiva boys and girls like get on these buses, head down to the Kotel on Rosh Chodesh just to sort of inflame and throw insults at Women of the Wall. Sometimes they're also met with physical violence, throwing of chairs. On occasion, you've seen, those little white plastic chairs thrown from the men's side over to the women's side. That happens on occasion. And of course, because what they're doing in protest is illegal according to Israeli law, the police often come through to confiscate the Torah scroll and to do what they can to break up the minyan of women. So that's a reality currently in Israel. And I think that's one of the reasons why I chose the topic that I have chosen for these 3 weeks, because to be a woman rabbi, or to be an egalitarian voice in Israel, remains quite difficult. And actually, the second reason why I've picked the topic is because if you look at the 1700 years of the existence of rabbinic legal texts, okay, let's just argue that rabbinic legal texts, beginning with the Mishnah, have been around on paper or parchment or whatever for 1700 years. An incredibly minute, minuscule amount of that 1700 year, collection of texts has been penned, authored by women rabbis. I mean, that's not surprising. But I think for those two reasons, I really thought that we could spend this 3-week section looking at legal halachic responsa written by 2 women rabbis who were part of the Masorti movement. The first thing, though, before we actually dive in, I wonder if anybody here, I wonder if you've heard the term. So the term responsa, I don't know if that's a new term for some of you. It's an English term. And I think I noticed in maybe in the promotional material, this is just a funny thing. David, good. This isn't about. I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's not you or anything else. It's just a funny thing that actually it's spelled responsa with an A, but I think maybe someone in one of the promos that I saw made it response with an E, because of course we think of a response as a response, but actually it's responsa, a responsum, multiple responsa, and that is, I guess, English for a type of legal rabbinic text called the She'elot Uchuvot. So my question to you is, have you heard of She'elot Uchuvot? What are they? Anybody want to feel free to unmute and just share what you might know about this category of legal text called She'elot Uchuvot. Otherwise, I can dive in and give you a super brief overview. So essentially, She'elot Uchuvot, which I'm now going to put in the chat. She'elot Uchuvot. So there it is. I've spelt it for all of you in the chat box. She'elot Uchuvot. A she'elah is a question. A tshuva is an answer. And the category She'elot Uchuvot basically comprises this body of written decisions and rulings given by individual rabbis. In rabbinic history, when it comes to a legal text, someone who offers a rabbinic opinion on a particular issue is called a posek, P-O-S-E-K, a posek. And multiple rabbis who offer positions on a particular issue are called poskim. So if you go to a rabbi with a particular she'elah, with a question, that rabbi will respond with a tshuva, and that tshuva, that response, actually carries halachic Jewish legal weight. That rabbi becomes a posek. And the answer that you get from that rabbi, you can choose to accept the answer or ignore the answer or refute the answer, but the answer itself carries halachic legal weight. So the concept of She'elot Uchuvot is sort of like the, I guess what's replaced that is if you kind of Google, ask the rabbi or one of those things for a particular answer to a question. So before the internet and before Google, She'elot Uchuvot was actually a very common thing. You had a particular question, you would go to your rabbi, and maybe you would even write a letter to the rabbi, and the rabbi would write a written response. And that response became a tshuva, became a legal position. Responsa literature has existed for 1,700 years or so. And of course, the mode and the style and the subject matter has evolved and changed over time. And it's evolved and changed just as basically a function of the travels of the Jewish people, the development of other halachic literature, literacy, and things of that nature have created the evolution of She'elot Uchuvot. So the questions that are forwarded to a rabbi are usually very practical, and they often concern something new, a new issue, a new contingency for which no previous provision has been made in the codes of Jewish law. So the she'elah and the tshuva that you would ask a rabbi are essentially supplements or an addendum to the codes, and they really do maintain the status. They're an extension of the law, so they are a source of law in a manner similar to a legal precedent. I offer that to you all because, look, very few women rabbis have been involved in this process of She'elot Uchuvot, and every responsa written or given by a rabbi really does hold a certain legal weight in the halachic world, and so that essentially is She'elot Uchuvot. I think on many of you you're all very familiar with CBI, which is a member of the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, which of course is the synagogue branch of the conservative movement. And the rabbinic branch of the conservative movement is the Rabbinical Assembly. The Rabbinical Assembly has a committee of Jewish law and standards, And it's a rotating body of 25 members of the rabbinical assembly who sit on that body and who discuss innovations to halacha, but essentially what that Committee of Jewish Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly does is it answers questions. So the CJLS, this body of the Rabbinical Assembly, basically waits for questions to come in from rabbis who might be all over the country, dealing with particular issues, and they're looking for halachic Jewish legal allowance or precedent or something to be created for them for their particular issue. And so the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards actually create Responsa based on questions that are brought to them. So they engage in this practice of She'elot Chuvad. And I think that, does that sort of frame this concept of question and answer clearly for all of you? Good. Okay, I got the thumbs up from Marion and Paula, that's great. And Karen and everybody, terrific. So some of you received, maybe you all received an email last week with a pretty large PDF packet with all of the She'elot Chuvot that we're going to look at over the next 3 weeks. You might have that, you might not have that, and that's okay, because I'll share the screen a little bit as well. So we'll be able to look at that together. A few years ago in Israel, so again, Israel, of course, where it's still not easy to be a woman rabbi, to be egalitarian, to be part of the Masorti movement. This edition was published, and this is Ask the Rabbi, and it's a compilation of She'elot Uchuvot that were penned by two leading Masorti rabbis in Israel, and they are Rabbi Monique Susskind Goldberg and Rabbi Diana Vila. And I have their short bios here. Monique Susskind Goldberg, research fellow at the Center for Women in Jewish Law at the Schechter Institute since 1999. And she has a number of publications. Actually, Rabbi Susskind Goldberg passed away. She died about 8 years ago. And Rabbi Diana Vila, also a research fellow at the Schechter Institute, has a number of publications, and she teaches. She teaches at Schechter. She's Schechter's representative on Ikar, and the book was edited by Rabbi David Galinkin. And actually, Galinkin and Vila, when I studied at Schechter back in 2010, they were both there, and I learned a bit from both of them. Actually, as I did Rabbi Warman, so a lot of familiar faces here. But essentially, this entire book are the collection of responsa that Rabbi Monique Susskind Goldberg and Rabbi Diana Vila issued. So in a way, as noted, the responsa that we're going to look at are not simply opinions. They are now part of the collection of Jewish law. They're part of the long sort of narrative and line and chain of halacha, and they're held up with as much weight as a responsa that the Rambam, that Maimonides would have issued. or that anybody else, any other rabbinic voice would have issued. And that's sort of the beautiful thing about the collection of Sheila to Chuvad. So let's dive into our first. Just before we do that, any questions on the concept of Sheila to Chuvad, on these two rabbis, on the Masorti movement in Israel, on, I don't know, egalitarianism in Israel, the whole thing? Let's start with Paula.
Just a question on the Responsa. So you go to your rabbi, you ask a question on whatever, your kashrut, your mezuzah, whatever, and you get an answer, and you don't like the answer, right? So you can ignore it, but can you just go on to the next rabbi and, I didn't like the answer I got, so I'm going to ask you and see if I got the answer I like. So Jewish. It's so Jewish.
I mean, look, it depends. So the short answer is yes. I mean, you could ignore it. You could go on to the next round. It's like a kid, wants something from parent one, doesn't get it, goes to parent two. I think this is where the relationship of rabbi and congregant comes into play. That perhaps even if you might not like the answer, I mean, if you have a deep relationship with that rabbi, or if it's someone you really know and respect, you might be inclined to heed the responsa regardless. Or you might be inclined to sort of challenge it by saying, this was a great response, but I'd love a little bit more. Like, what is in fact your justification for the response, and bring me a little bit deeper.
So follow up to that is, this seems very sort of local and shtetl-y, so that rabbis all over are doing this. And it's not, I mean, there's a book that the book that you shared with us, but I mean, there's contradictory, globally, there's contradictory stuff. And it's very, especially in the ultra Orthodox, you go to your rabbi and you listen to your rabbi, and the rabbi in the next town, you don't care what he says, even if he says the opposite. So there's not like a big database of this stuff. It's very sort of local, and it's a little, it's a little old fashioned in that way.
It is. And actually, I think that's a great observation. Only in the last 200 or so years, I think, has the Jewish world, and particularly the Jewish world of scholarship, become aware of the vastness of this tradition of Sheila to Chuvot from all over the place. Because it's true that the rabbi in Algeria who was doing Sheila to Chuvot for hundreds of years in Algeria, for that particular community, that maybe that those responsa never made it to Poland, and were only discovered, when a particular researcher from some institute in Israel in the 1950s decided to, particularly with the mass exodus from Algeria to Israel to France, and then they brought these responsa, and then that's when the responsa then sort of received a new audience and were recorded in new different ways. So a good example would be, if you are a Jewish community in Siberia, Siberia, Russia, are you really obligated to eat an entire meal, and in fact, to live and dwell and sleep in a sukkah in the middle of October? Yeah, I mean, like the Rambam says so, and the code of Jewish law says so, but really in Siberia, right? Like, David, good. This is how yeshiva stay in business. But it's very particular. So you would write the question to the rabbi of Siberia, and it's like, okay, we've studied the sources, we get what the sources say, what the classical sources say, but come on, really, it's 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and how can we be expected to spend all night in the sukkah? It doesn't make sense. Sheila uchuva, Sheila uchuva. It's very local. And so very steadily, excellent point. And in a way, maybe that's once as Jews traveled and ended up, from Exodus to Exodus to Exodus and ended up all over the world, I think it's the responsa that kept Judaism alive and relevant, and also practical in that it allowed it to sustain itself when perhaps otherwise conditions wouldn't have permitted it. So if you're way up in Alaska, or if you're in, if you're in the northern parts of Scandinavia and the sun doesn't set and you need to know when to start Shabbat, you cannot look to the classical codes. You've got to deal with it locally. And if there was no mechanism to deal with it locally, after a few decades or a few hundred years, people might say, I'm done with this. I obviously can't do it. So I think it's actually the local shtetl-like mechanisms that kind of kept us going. So what's unique about this book and these responsa that we're going to read is that actually the majority of the questions came from European Jews who identify as being part of the Masorti movement. Now, Masorti, meaning the conservative movement in Europe, is 30 years old. That's it. It's about 30, 32, 35 years old. And so it didn't really have the rabbinic presence. It certainly did for the first few decades in the late 80s and the 90s in London and in Paris. But in other cities and smaller places in Europe where there were sprinklings of Masorti, conservative movement-minded Jews, the rabbinic presence just wasn't there. And just to give you an example of it, even today in France, there are 8 conservative movement communities. There are 8 Masorti congregations in France, but there are only 3 Masorti rabbis to service all 8. So on occasion, individuals who really needed responsa would actually turn to Israel, to the Masorti movement in Israel, to get the answers. So by and large, some of these questions are from local Israelis in the Masorti movement, and some of them are from Europeans who were looking for rabbinic guidance and wrote to the Schechter Institute in Jerusalem. I think also what will be interesting for us to see is as we go through the responsa, do you think that that the approaches of these 2 women rabbis and that they're the things that they are sensitive to and the things that they perceive and the ways in which they respond, are they perhaps different from other responsa you've seen that are written by men? That will also keep that in the back of your mind. That'll be interesting to think about as well. Marion.
Yeah, can individual people send in questions? Because I was always taught it had to come from rabbi to rabbi. But in this area, you go to your local rabbi first, and he's the next step. But in other areas, they don't have that.
Right. So it works both ways. Sometimes it was definitely, almost like in a movie, like young rookie rabbi goes to a community and then discovers there are all of these questions or issues or whatever, and then writes to that person's seminary or writes to a reputable gadol rabbi who's out there and gets a responsa that local rabbi then uses for the community. And other times it really is direct. I mean, so in theory, Marion, you could write a halachic question or pose a halachic question to the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards. To, you could send it to someone at the Schechter Institute in Israel. You could in the way almost that on a synagogue level, someone's got a question of halacha, and maybe you formally write the question to the religious affairs committee. So what's on the typically or traditionally, what's on the agenda of a religious affair committee meeting? Questions that congregants pose. So we go about that mechanism as well. That at its core, that was the function of the modern synagogue's religious affairs committee, to answer halachic questions or concerns of congregants, but not perceived, but like real questions that were before them. So there you have it. Shall we dive into the first? Let's dive in. I would love, is there someone who wants to, I'm going to put it up on the screen, but let me just, while I see you all before I share screen, does someone want to read the question for us? We'll just start with the question. Just let me know if you're into reading, raise your hand or just unmute. And okay, Susan Gordon's going to read. I'm going to screen share. And here we are. So the first question, and the category is, does ritual observance take precedence over parental respect? Fascinating topic. Susan.
Yeah. Dear Rabbi, I have recently become strictly observant as far as following the rules of Shabbat, Kashrut, and ritual observance in general. My mother is a secular Jew who feels a strong Jewish identification, but after the Holocaust, my family grew more hostile toward Judaism. They have never been observant and are bothered by my increased observance of halakha. Now, the only place where I still eat vegetarian food from non-kosher utensils and pots and pans is in my mother's house. I try to kosher individual utensils from time to time, but this cannot be done with the dishware. I feel in a double bind. Yes, I am violating halakha when eating in her kitchen, but on the other hand, insisting that I keep separate utensils and pans would be an affront to her. She frequently voices her discontent with my level of observance, and I know she is very bitter toward the Jewish community in general. I am trying to balance two realities, the halachic reality and the reality of kibud respect for one's mother. How can I honor my mother while still staying true to the Jewish dietary laws? The whole situation is so emotionally precarious. Does ritual observance take precedence over family unity? What is your advice?
So that's an incredible question. And maybe the question itself helps us understand this rich history and tradition of She'elotu Chuvot, that they really are, particular, individualistic in a way, questions that could be relevant to a person or relevant to a community. So I don't know. Maybe let's read the response, and then we can just spend a few minutes discussing the issue, discussing the response. You can even let me know if, like Paula, if you would then go shopping around for other rabbis to get different responses. Let's see. I'm happy to read the response, but I'm equally happy for someone else who might want to read it for us to take it away, and I'll screen share again. Amy Dantis, let me screen share the response.
Answer. Honoring one's parents is one of the 10 commandments. See Exodus 20:11 and Deuteronomy 5:15. And revering one's parents is another mitzvah, Leviticus 19:3. The Talmud describes in detail what honoring and revering parents entails. For example, supplying all of his or her needs, not sitting in a parent's place, not contradicting him or her, see Kiddushim, blah, blah, blah. Yet that respect has its limits. If a parent is annoyed by the fact that one is observant, one cannot really accommodate him or her. One cannot obey one's parents if they order one to transgress a mitzvah. The Talmud says that if the father asks his son, who is a Kohen, to break the laws of purity or not to return a lost object, he cannot obey his father, as God's honor comes before the parent's honor. According to Rabbi Joseph Caro, one cannot disobey even a rabbinic law if a parent requests it. As far as revering your mother without transgressing kashrut laws, we suggest the following. According to Jewish dietary laws, you can eat cold, uncooked foods in your mother's home, such as fruits and vegetables. Some other foods are possible as well. Bread, as long as it's clear that it has no non-kosher ingredients, such as lard. Cheeses, even without a hechsher or rabbinic stamp of approval, for those who accept the opinion that rennet from animals that are not slaughtered according to Jewish law is permitted. Canned sardines, canned tuna, preferably with a hechsher, since some authorities are wary that non-kosher fish may be mixed with the tuna fish. Smoked salmon, pickled herring, preferably kosher, since there are some special considerations regarding pickled products in Jewish law. You can also have a stock of kosher products in your mother's home, including crackers, cookies, gefilte fish jars, to make it easier when you visit your mother. For more details about kashrut, see blah, blah, blah. It is obvious that you are trying to make the best of a very difficult situation, so keep trying to use kosher dishes, pots, and pans, and try to observe as much as you possibly can according to Jewish law. Nowadays, disposable pans, dishes, and cutlery are also available. It is best to avoid conflict as much as you possibly can. You clearly respect your mother, and let us hope that she will learn to respect your way of life. Sincerely, Rabbi Diana Vila.
That's right. So that one, thank you, Amy. That one was authored by Rabbi Diana Vila in March of 2005. Questions for you all to consider are there ways in which perhaps a woman's rabbi voice responded to this perhaps in a way that might have been different from a man rabbi's voice? What are your thoughts on the issue in general, on the sensitivities of it, and even on this idea that we know about respecting parents in the Torah, but that clearly there's a limit to what one can do in order to fulfill the mitzvah of kivud of the em, of respecting one's parents. On all of these things, what are your thoughts on this as a responsa, which now, by the way, this is a legal halachic document at this point. Susan,
do we have any response from any men on this subject? Because I'd like to, I'd like to hear the tone, because this is definitely, from a woman's point of view, it's all the practical things. It's about the dishes that you should use. It's about, what you can eat. It's obviously somebody who's prepared meals. So I'd just be curious as a way to compare what a a male rabbi might say on the same subject.
Little sexist on the male rabbi not preparing meals, but
Well, yeah, I'm you know, in my house it doesn't happen. So,
Yeah, Marian.
Yeah, I don't think there would be a difference. I remember learning that there was a rabbi, a woman in a shtetl brought a chicken and said, "Is this kosher?" And the rabbi said yes. And somebody said to him, "But there were problems." And he said that the only way this woman would have a Shabbat dinner is if I said it was kosher. So I think rabbis are sensitive to that. But my question is, does it work the other way around? I mean, my kids keep kosher homes, but what if they didn't? And I went and I keep a kosher home and I go to their home. Is there this Responsa, does it go both ways?
By the way, I remember, so that's a great question. I remember.
I'm not trying to put you on a spot.
No. But just going back to you know, it's true that I don't have I don't have a Responsa on this question written by a man that I can sort of put up so that we can compare, you know, copy to copy. But I do recall there's this great story about Rabbi Soloveitchik, you know, like prominent Orthodox rabbi, written all of these books and texts, and people, you know, did go to him for Responsa, Sheila to Chuvad, and his wife, the story about his wife having gone away to visit family somewhere for a week or 10 days, and she gets back, she comes back home and she walks into the kitchen and she shrieks. And, you know, she said to her husband, you know, Rav Soloveitchik, like, you trafed up the kitchen, you know, like in his mind, he understood kashrut from the codes of Jewish law. He'd never actually himself kind of been in the kitchen, you know, preparing things or anything like that. And so he didn't recognize that actually there are other, you know, considerations and practical applications to the whole thing. And it's not just what's in the Shulchan Aruch. Or that's just a, you know, funny little story. I saw Karen and Lily. Go for it.
So I get this and it's face value, but do we take this a little further? You know, this guy or woman or whomever is saying that his parents, especially his mother, is not particularly accommodating. But it's not about the pots and the pans and the food, it's about the relationship. And that's a whole other issue. So are we taking this as just face value of how he deals with his parent in the home, or how he deals with his parent in life or her parent in life?
That's a great point. That's a great point. Lily?
I think it's cop-out on the Posik's point. Obviously, yeah, you eat tuna fish, you eat sardines, you have lox. I mean, you know, I go to my people who are not kosher and they accommodate me. They make dairy. The issue is if her mother cooks a meal, is a vegetarian meal, is she allowed to eat it? And I think that, yeah, I mean, the person who's put the question forth, if she had half a brain, would understand, yeah, you eat fruits and vegetables and you make do. The issue is, what if my mom makes a kosher chicken, but in treif dishes, a meal for me to accommodate me? What do I do? And that's and that goes back to what Karen said too. You know, there's the relationship. Why is the mother being so difficult with this child? I would accommodate my kid. If they started being vegetarian, I'd make vegetarian. I wouldn't say tough, eat meat, that's all you're eating. But, you know, it's complicated. But I don't
Lily, what's the
question?
Yeah, what's the cop-out part when you said that? Just that
Yeah, we understand you can eat sardines and jarred gefilte fish. You know, do you think the mother is saying, you know, how do you think the mother would feel if she cooks a vegetarian meal and then the kid opens up jarred gefilte fish?
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. Amy and Risa.
So I feel like in a lot of ways, this is my life. And, you know, not with my mother when she was alive, she was more accommodating, but with my in-laws who are more ignorant. And, you know, and they tried, you know, but you can't, you know, they would buy a kosher chicken, but then they would put non-kosher things on it. You know, and then or the non-kosher chicken soup that, you know, everybody had to have, and I would decline, and then she would start crying. So, you know, it was a major balancing act. And, you know, but I do agree that the issue here was more the lack of respect on the religious observance than on the kashrut. And, you know, and I understand if a parent wants to serve a hot meal and it doesn't just have to be vegetables, you know, I said my mother-in-law went out and got a kosher chicken and she eventually learned not to put anything on it. Or I go to my brother-in-law and they actually get from the kosher butcher a totally different meal for me. And I was willing on Thanksgiving to bring my own dinner, but everybody seems to go buy a kosher turkey, small one, or kosher breast, and that's mine. And everybody else can have everything else. It's a balancing act, and we just do the best we can. But I really think the issue is more of if the mother is not on board with the child becoming more observant. That's more the issue than the kashrut.
Mm-hmm. And Rabbi Vila does say at the very end, you know, it is best to avoid conflict as much as you possibly can. I think that was an important addition, I think, to the tshuva. Risa, you're muted.
Sorry.
Okay.
I think it's a lot about the personalities of the people, the level of respect, whether it's a mother, it doesn't have to be a mother. I had a nephew do it to me who's Orthodox. And I have to admit, I felt very insulted when the bagels came from Supreme, our place we get the bagels from, and et cetera, et cetera. And he claimed he couldn't eat because he didn't know where the rabbi was from the food I got, but he didn't ask me. And so he left there starving. But I have to say, I respect someone who's kosher. In this case, I think the person, to not insult the mother, is better off to just say, I'm not hungry, or eat little bits, or be polite. I think the level of insult, because I've had it happen to me, and it, you know, I forgave him. Actually, my mother, who was more kosher than me, was more upset with it. And she said, I can't believe you haven't eaten. And the nephew said, who I adore now, I got over it very quickly. The nephew said to my mother, it's between myself and my God. And my mother said, that God doesn't want you insulting my daughter. So she kind of interfered where she shouldn't have. And he tried the God thing to get her out of the argument. But I think that the person who's more kosher, who's more anything, more vegetarian, more vegan, has to be more respectful and just not set up that circumstance almost. It's not so important that they eat in that home. They could eat somewhere else. They could take a walk, as we've all learned in this time. It doesn't have to be that exact. I know in Judaism, a big meal and a Shabbat meal and all this is the thing, but it can be done another way. And so what I've done to accommodate that nephew, because he clearly assumes I'm not kosher, is I just go out with them or I go to their house.
Yeah, that's... Thank you for that, Risa. Okay, Lil, we're gonna go to you, then hang on. Yeah, Lil, and then Wendy, and then Francis. That's right. Lil, you're on.
I just want to say one thing. Respect is very important. You have no idea in my lifetime how many plates of food I have moved around from, one part of the plate to the next, and nobody realized. I never insulted anyone, and I've been strictly kosher all my life. So there's a way to do it.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a very good point. Wendy?
I'm going to take a different side. Maybe when someone becomes more observant, sometimes they can explain to others. And I know, I heard Amy's story, so I understand that as well. But sometimes explaining to others that we've changed or we're changing the way we're eating. And, if you do this for us, we'll be comfortable here, may be something that avoids that future problem. Like, again, if you have a special dietary need that it's a medical need, you won't walk into someone's house and then say, oh, I can't eat that because I have an allergy or I have a health problem. You would, before you were going to eat in someone's house, when this first occurs or when you start to become more observant, maybe if you sat down and explained what you will eat and what you won't eat, it may also avoid the situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good observation. That's a very good point. Francis?
Hearing about Reese's nephew reminds me that I have a niece who is very observant. I do keep a kosher home, but I don't set myself up as a model for anyone. And because she is very observant, and I know that when we used to have lunch together, she would come to my apartment in the days when people got together. I had separate dishes and separate knives and forks for her, and depending on the day or the time or whatever, I would pop up to the Jerusalem Deli and pick up stuff that I knew she would enjoy, and have fresh fruit that she would peel. On a short notice, I would hard-boiled eggs, and I was never insulted. I understood where she was coming from, and it worked out just fine.
That's a great example of it working out. Absolutely. I just to play devil's advocate, like I do wonder if any of you would consider perhaps like an opposite, landing on a different halachic answer, which would be actually a little bit more along the lines of, it's clear your mother has some trauma, residual trauma from the Holocaust, and it sounds like the only issue are the the utensils and the dishes, and not so much the actual food, and therefore, Rabbi, I'm going to recommend to you, in order to keep peace in the home and all of that, that you actually, get over it and use her stuff when you're in her home. Like I'm not suggesting that's what I would have written. I think that would have been another interesting perspective. And I don't know if that approach resonates with some of you, or what you think of that. But to me, that would be the sort of devil's advocate answer to this responsa. Paula?
I feel like in a lot of these similar situations where somebody becomes more observant than they had originally been, growing up or whatever, that people tend to sort of lean toward, pacifying for the person who's become more observant, as if what they've done is more important than the feelings. I mean, really, in this situation, I think the parent's feelings and the child's feelings are equally important, which is why it's so difficult. I mean, the parent can be feeling anything from you're rejecting the way I raised you. Why are you doing that? So I don't know why you need to accommodate that, or, pushing back on that. So yeah, what you just raised actually, Rabbi, about, just saying like, for Shalom Bayit, you figure it out. I mean, I know when my brother-in-law was, who is Chabad, became Chabad, wasn't raised Chabad, but became Chabad. David tells the story, people have probably heard it, but when he first came home, when he first became Chabad, and he was like super zealous and whatever, and he came home for Pesach for the first time, and he, wanted to like blowtorch his mother's oven because the oven didn't get hot enough to kosher it properly. And his mother was like, you're not taking a blowtorch to my oven. And so David's brother went to his rabbi, and the rabbi said, actually, which is, I think, nice about Chabad, he said, Shalom Bayit is more important than the temperature of the oven. Yeah. You can still kosher the oven, but being in your mother's house is more important. And the same thing when David's mother passed away, his brother sat Shiva in my house in Brooklyn. And, he just, and I went out and I got special food, but he didn't ask. He just trusted that, because he wanted to be with his brother, and he just trusted that, we were going to respect him. And so sometimes there's got to be back and forth on both sides of that. People have both got to bend.
Yeah, that's a great addition to the discussion. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Terry and Risa, go for it.
I was the recipient of that treatment. My mother-in-law, we could never be enough of whatever it was. So when she would come to my home, I would serve her on paper plates to make her feel comfortable. And I would buy special stuff for her, but she would read every label. And it really did a lot of head damage on my kids, because it was just like we never felt like we could kind of be enough. So I think it's more important, the relationship and the care that people put into and the efforts. It's not easy. You can never be quite enough if they set the standard so high. So that's all I'm adding. It's sad. It was a sad situation, but we did everything that we could. But she'd go into my cabinets and read all the things, make sure the hechshers were on everything. I remember I had condensed milk in the cabinet, and my daughter at the time was maybe 4 or 5. She says, "Here, Grandma, here's cow soup. You can have cow soup." So, yeah, it did a trip.
Thanks for sharing that, Terry. Thank you. Risa.
No, I just wanted to respond to Paula. But like, how far do you go when both sides accommodate each other? I made my daughter a wedding at a kosher place where you got married, Rabbi. And I had to do the glot menu and not the regular. And whatever that meant, an extra rabbi coming, or this or that. And I know there were a lot of rabbis that would have told me you don't have to do it. But I really wanted to accommodate my family. We're talking about, because most of them from Israel couldn't come or couldn't afford to come, we're talking about 7 people in the group of 200, and yet I had to do a glot affair. So I'm thrilled I did it. It all worked out great. And one of the people told me, a niece who came from Israel, I didn't have to do glot. So, it's just, you accommodate, but it is a lot to accommodate. And you might accommodate, it might not be a kosher person in life. It might be somebody's cold in their house and you have to keep the temperature higher if a sick person's sick or whatever. And there's always a lot of accommodating, but I just don't know why Judaism, like in the story of Terry, requests us to have such a standard that most people can't live up to. It's a tough standard.
And at that wedding venue, I'm well aware of the glut versus non-glut. The mashgiach, that glut mashgiach, he He ain't cheap. I'll tell you that. And I bit my tongue and did the same thing just for that. But yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing, even in a kosher venue, the different sort of streams. Absolutely. Great point, Risa. Paula.
I get what you're saying, Risa. And I think that's more an individual interpretation rather than like overall, like Judaism makes it. It's how people interpret it. Like I was mentioning my brother-in-law and that he relaxed, you know, but now his oldest son is way more hyper about stuff than he is. Way more hyper about stuff. I once had them over for a barbecue and I had to go shopping and I called him on the phone because the different hechshers, like he needed this rabbi's hechsher for beef and this rabbi's hechsher for chicken. And I was on the phone and I was taking pictures of the labels because it was making me crazy. So, but his father wouldn't even bother. He wouldn't do that. He'd say, yeah, you know, it's kosher, buy it, I'll eat it, whatever. So it's also individual mishigas.
Yeah. That and you know that's the beauty of our tradition too, that we have all these different approaches. The last word, I mean, I'm looking at the time, it's amazing, you know. Okay, the last word to Amy, and then we'll wrap up here, and I'll give you a little preview of next week.
Okay, so I was just going to add with Cherry's mother-in-law that basically, you know, if she had checked with her rabbi, he would have told her, trust your daughter-in-law. If she says something is kosher, you're okay. She's accommodating you. And my, what I was taught is that when you go to a rabbi, you should always have an idea of the answer the rabbi is going to give you, because what I was always told is that's the answer. You can't go shopping for a new rabbi. Oh. So you should always know where that rabbi leans before you go ask the question. But that's what I was always told.
That it's true. I mean, like technically one shouldn't go shopping around for a different answer. That's right. Whether one does, you know, that's the, look, the other thing, and I'll conclude with this, given that this was written down and published, I recognize Rabbi Diana Vila's really kind of towing that line. But I do wonder if this were a phone call, you know, sort of off the record, I wonder if Rabbi Vila's answer to this person would have been a little bit different and maybe, you know, given this person a little bit more rope or latitude to just be more comfortable in her mom's home. Something just to think about and consider. Next week, we're gonna dive into more of them. I think next week we'll begin with the Sheila Chuvad. Are Jews permitted to enter mosques and churches and to attend non-Jewish ceremonies? And we'll see next week if we can, you know,